Get ready to dive deep into something I think we all take for granted, arterial blood pressure. We've got excerpts from a physiology handout by Dr. Rasha Eldeeb. This goes way beyond just like, those numbers you get when you go to the doctor.
Yeah, definitely. Arterial blood pressure, ABP, it's like a secret language. It tells us so much about our cardiovascular health. We might think it's simple, but it's really a dynamic system, how our heart and blood vessels are working.
Okay, so I think we all know, like, the basic idea, systolic over diastolic. But what's interesting is that difference between the two, the pulse pressure. It tells us about how old and flexible our arteries are.
Like, think of it like a rubber band. If the pulse pressure is wide, the arteries are getting stiff, like an old rubber band that's lost its stretch.
Makes sense. But how does blood actually get to our tissues? It's not just about, like, the peak systolic number, is it?
Right. We have to talk about mean arterial pressure, or MAP. That's the average pressure that's driving blood to all the tissues. It's actually not just a simple average. It's weighted towards the diastolic pressure.
Wait, why is that? Why is the diastolic number so important?
Because our tissues need constant blood flow, not just these bursts every time the heart beats. That steady flow is maintained by the pressure in the arteries when the heart is relaxing, the diastolic pressure.
So, like, our body prioritizes a steady stream more.
Exactly. And that's where the Windkessel effect comes in. So picture the aorta, the big artery, like a balloon. When the heart pumps, the aorta stretches to hold the blood. And then between heartbeats, it recoils and pushes the blood forward. Keeps everything smooth.
Okay, I'm seeing how intricate this whole thing is. So what are some things that, like, can really mess with blood pressure?
Oh, there are a lot of things. Age, definitely.
Uh-huh.
Newborns, they have surprisingly low blood pressure, like around 80/40. As we get older, though, it goes up, partly because of those stiff arteries.
That makes sense. What about, like, daily things? Does, what we eat even affect our blood pressure?
Totally. Even just eating, that can cause blood pressure to go up for a bit. Your digestive system needs more blood to process all that food.
So blood pressure is, like, always changing based on what we're doing.
Exactly. It's really dynamic. And don't forget about emotions, too. We've all felt our hearts race when we're stressed, and that means blood pressure's going up, too.
Yeah, like our body is getting ready to fight or run away, even if it's just, a presentation at work or something.
Precisely. But here's one that surprised me when I learned about it. Gravity actually plays a big role in blood pressure. The pressure in your feet is a lot higher than in your head.
Okay, I get that gravity is involved, but how much higher are we talking about here?
Well, someone say 6 feet tall. That pressure difference between head and feet could be over 100 millimilli-Hg. Blood has to work against gravity to get to the brain. Like, imagine carrying something heavy uphill. It takes more effort.
100 millimillimeter. Wow, that's wild. But I guess it makes sense. So it's not just what's going on inside our bodies. It's also things like gravity that are constantly changing our blood pressure.
It's always a balance between our body and the environment, like a constant adjustment act. Speaking of adjustments, let's get into the factors that determine blood pressure. There's a whole bunch of things going on.
Okay, so we talked about how blood pressure is always, like, changing based on all these different things, meals, even gravity. But what determines our blood pressure, like, in the first place?
Well, there are two main things: cardiac output and peripheral resistance. You can think of it like this. Yeah. Your heart is the engine, pumping blood. That's the cardiac output. And then how easily the blood flows through the vessels, that's peripheral resistance.
So it's like a two-part equation. Heart power times how easy the blood flows.
Exactly. And both parts are affected by a lot of things. Cardiac output, first. That depends on two things: stroke volume, the amount of blood pumped with each beat, and heart rate, how many beats per minute.
So if my heart's pumping more blood each beat, that means higher blood pressure.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, but in a specific way. Increasing stroke volume mainly affects the systolic pressure. Imagine squeezing a water balloon. The harder you squeeze, the higher the pressure inside, right? It's like your heart is squeezing, and the balloon is your aorta.
So bigger squeeze, higher systolic pressure. Okay, got it. What about heart rate? If my heart's beating faster, wouldn't that also make blood pressure go up?
It does, but it mainly affects the diastolic. Remember, diastolic pressure is that baseline pressure between beats. So faster heart rate, less time for the pressure to go down between beats. Diastolic stays high.
It's like both things can raise blood pressure. Stroke volume makes systolic go up, heart rate keeps diastolic up.
Yeah, Exactly. Now let's look at the other one, peripheral resistance. This is where your blood vessels are important.
Yeah.
Think of them like pipes. If the pipes are narrow, it's harder for blood to flow. The pressure has to be higher.
Okay, yeah. Like if my vessel is constricted, it's like trying to force a whole river through a tiny channel. It's going to take way more pressure.
Exactly. And our bodies can actually change how wide those blood vessels are. Through vasoconstriction and vasodilation, arteries constrict, resistance goes up, blood pressure goes up. They dilate, get wider, resistance and pressure go down.
So our blood vessels are always like adjusting to fine-tune the pressure.
Right. It's pretty amazing. But that's not the only thing affecting resistance. The thickness of your blood viscosity, that matters too. Thicker blood, it's like trying to push honey through those pipes instead of water. Needs more pressure.
I like that. I remember Dr. Eldeeb mentioned how anemia, having fewer red blood cells, that can make your blood thinner, actually.
That's right. And the opposite, dehydration can make it thicker. That can raise blood pressure.
So it's not just the pipes themselves, it's what's flowing through them. What else matters for resistance?
Well, the elasticity of the arteries is important. Remember that balloon analogy for the aorta? As we age, arteries get less elastic. Less stretchy, they can't expand and recoil as easily.
So they can't absorb those pressure changes as well.
Right. That's why systolic pressure tends to go up with age. The arteries can't expand as much when the heart pumps.
This is making me think about how important it is to take care of our arteries.
Hmm.
What about blood volume? Does that affect blood pressure too?
Oh, absolutely. This one is more straightforward. Less blood volume, less pressure. Think about like dehydration or bleeding. Blood volume goes down, and that can cause a dangerous drop in pressure.
So it's like our body's balancing all these factors. The heart's power, how big and flexible the vessels are, even the volume of blood itself, like a super complex balancing act.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. And what's amazing is that our body has these systems to regulate all of that, to make sure blood pressure stays in a healthy range, like a team of uh, tiny paramedics constantly working to keep everything running smoothly.
Okay, I want to hear more about that. These internal regulators, what are they like?
Well, there are different levels of control, fast reflexes that respond to changes really quickly, and then slower hormonal systems that adjust things over time. We can start with those reflexes. They're really cool.
So tell me about these like rapid response systems for blood pressure. It's like our body has its own 9/11.
Yeah, pretty much. And it's super efficient. One of the main ones is the baroreceptor reflex. They're these tiny pressure sensors in your carotid arteries and aorta, always checking your blood pressure like watchdogs.
So they're the first ones to like notice if something changes suddenly.
Exactly. They detect a pressure drop, boom, signal goes to the brain, nervous system kicks in fast, heart rate up, vessels constrict, heart pumps harder, all to get that pressure back up.
And what if it goes too high? Do those baroreceptors work both ways?
Oh yeah, for sure. If pressure spikes, they do the opposite. Heart rate slows down, vessels relax, heart takes it easy on the contractions, brings the pressure back down.
It's crazy how our bodies just do that,
Yeah.
without us even thinking about it. What other reflexes are involved?
Well, we have chemoreceptors. They're more about blood chemistry, mainly oxygen levels, but they're important for blood pressure too.
Okay, how so?
So, say your pressure drops too low, that could mean not enough oxygen is getting to the important organs. Chemoreceptors pick up on that, send a message to the brain. Boom, big response to raise pressure and get that oxygen flowing again.
It's like a backup, making sure the brain and heart are okay.
Yep, exactly. Then there are the atrial reflexes, which are really interesting. They start in the heart itself.
Wait, so the heart can control its own blood pressure?
Yeah. When blood volume goes up, it stretches the atria, the top chambers of the heart. The atria have these sensors that feel the stretching.
Like the heart saying, hey, things are getting a bit full in here.
Exactly. And that sets off all these responses. Heart rate goes up, vessels in the kidneys open up to get rid of fluid, hormones that hold on to water get shut down. It's all about getting the pressure and volume back in balance.
Wow, the heart is like a multitasker, huh? Pumping blood, A&D, controlling all of that.
It is. Now, let's say blood flow to the brain gets dangerously low, like from a sudden pressure drop. That's when the CNS ischemic response kicks in, like the emergency brake, a survival mechanism.
So it's a last resort to, like, save the brain.
Exactly. Massive blood pressure spike. Vessels all over constrict, sending blood to the brain. Buy some time until whatever caused the low pressure is fixed.
That's a pretty intense reflex, but Dr. Eldeeb mentions that these short-term things are only part of it. There's also long-term control, right?
Right. We have intermediate things like fluid shifting between capillaries and tissues that take a bit longer. And then there are the hormonal systems. They're the ones that really control blood volume and pressure over the long haul.
So many different systems working on different timelines. It's like an orchestra, keeping our blood pressure just right.
A perfect example of homeostasis, that balance our bodies are always striving for.
Wow, this has been eye-opening. Blood pressure is way more than just two numbers. It's dynamic, it responds to everything, and has all these systems keeping it in check. It makes you appreciate how amazing our bodies are.
Definitely. And the more we learn about it, the better we can take care of ourselves.
So listeners, now that you know all this, think about this. What are some things you can do to keep your own blood pressure healthy? We'll leave you with that thought.